this meeting, or that if there's 10 stakeholders for this project, I don't think there should be. I think any project should have like one stakeholder, or maybe two, but if there's 10 people that are deciding about the project, so I think that it's not, like either none of them are stakeholders, or one of them is, but it's like, I think usually what happens is that every one of those 10 people will have a slightly different opinion, and then that will like just kind of mess up with the project and the schedule.
And do you think that will change by behavior change of people like you coming into organizations and saying no more meetings, or will it be the tools that people use? Like, how will we get to the kind of more efficient state in the future?
Yeah, I think like there needs to be some kind of change on overall like how we think about these things. Like just generally like how do we, like I think like companies could be more observant on a way that they operate. I mean it's like I think a lot of things are somewhat obvious that like how they could operate better. I think the hard part is actually like people know like yes we should have less meetings, but it's hard to enforce, or it's hard to like systemize. So what some of the things what we're doing is we're trying to figure out some of those best ways, like what are the best ways to actually build software and like run the team so it's like efficient, that people feel actually that they feel meaningful, that the work is meaningful for them. But I think like the way to do it is that it's to build this kind of like a platform or like a system that helps the companies and the management run the process rather than them running it themselves. So I think a lot of the management today is about you go to talk to this person and then you talk to this person and this person and you repeat the same things to everyone, and that's what every like management like CEOs have to do. You just have to repeat everything, which I think it could be much better if you have a system that okay, we want to change the priorities, I put it into this system, now it will kind of deploy to the organization, or we want to say that okay, now projects should be actually focusing on this metric or this goal. Okay.
Oh, now it's the future has arrived.
Anyway, so the project should focus on this goal. I can like set it up into the system, and then it will automatically like deploy to all people who are working on projects, and like any new project that will be started, we'll use that as the template. So.
Got it. And back, Sophie, to you to talk about individuals. How will the career trajectory be different for Gen Z? Will I have one job? Will I have multiple jobs? You mentioned a little bit the difference about not an educational chapter and then a work chapter. What will it look like for that generation?
Right. I think we're already seeing that trend with the millennial generation. Like people don't go in and have one job. They don't have one career path. They switch. Every 2 to 4 years, and people need constant retraining. I think the pace of change is so fast now, with new technologies coming in, that everyone always needs to upskill. Everyone always needs to be changing career paths and changing their skill sets. So I actually think we'll have a system where people will always be learning, always be applying those skills. So in fact, everyone will be going through effectively an apprenticeship, whether it's a formal apprenticeship or not, whether that's in a digital tech or professional service career or in sort of more the traditional trades. I think that's the system that we're moving towards. I think that for the Gen Z or Gen Z, they expect much more career fluidity. We're seeing that they expect fluidity in everything, right? Their identity, whether that's gender or anything else, they think about themselves in a much more fluid way. And they also expect that with their career. They question why they can't move from being a digital marketer to being a software engineer to being a manager. Like, why can't they make these moves through their career? And I think the answer is they can. But interestingly, because they are also the generation that grew up during the financial crisis, they also crave stability. So it's a funny, tension there between identity fluidity and wanting career fluidity and stability. And I think companies that can embrace that give people the opportunity to stay within an organization, keep that stability of company, but give them fluidity in terms of their career path by seeing potential, harnessing that potential, investing in them with training, will actually reap huge dividends from their employees. So I think we're seeing a world where people may stay longer with a company but move more fluidly fluidly between different roles and have that constant training on an ongoing basis. And what's exciting to me with the young people we work with at White Hat is we work primarily with people who are at the start of their career, people who are leaving school 16, 17, 18 to sort of 24, 25. And they're starting their career path with this experience of simultaneous work and training. So they're learning knowledge, skills, and behavior. They're not going just doing an online course. They're embedding those skills that they're learning in their work. And so they've never experienced anything different. They don't think of work and education as being separate. They expect to constantly be learning. And I think if you embed that early, that's actually a fundamental shift in the system.
And do you think it'll be apprenticeships, at least as they are today, as one chapter? Do you imagine someone will be doing multiple apprenticeships as they pivot throughout their career?
Right, we already see that. I think apprenticeships are not limited to people at the beginning of their career, and you will do these consecutive apprenticeships throughout your career. So, for example, somebody might start doing a digital marketing apprenticeship for a couple of years. They build deep skills in that area, but they realize that increasingly they're using data. I mean, everything involves data these days, and being able to manipulate and crunch that data is becoming more and more challenging. So then they would progress on to, say, doing data science, doing a data science apprenticeship, and they would become the expert in their team who can use Python and R and do regression analysis. And then they take on a team and they need to have management skills, and so they'll go through a management training process. Rather than being shipped off for 2 years to do an MBA program, they'll actually spend the time of learning the skills, applying those skills, reflecting on their skills, and fundamentally building their businesses to be better businesses. I think the companies that embrace that will end up being much more productive and much more successful, because investing in your employees and developing them is the best and cheapest way to create more shareholder value.
Thank you. And Kari, I think there are going to be a lot of people who will want to be apprentices to you and how to build a more efficient kind of business. So can you talk a little bit about how at Linear you're working asynchronously and you get to build it as a founder kind of from the ground up? So how are you implementing some of this, what the future of business should be like at Linear?
Yeah, we, even like with the founding team now, like we are now distributed between San Francisco, New York, and Helsinki. So that's already like 10-hour time zone difference. And that's like, I think the main thing that people sometimes forget about remote work is that the time zones is the real problem. It's like there's no fix to it. Really, I mean, people could switch how they sleep and are awake, but that's really hard. But so what needs to happen is the only way to solve that problem is to try to move more of the work into asynchronous, so that I think, for example, like rather than have a meeting, like make a decision, like write a document, talk about it on the document, then maybe have a meeting if it's needed. And I think like this is already, I think we also, again, like we know probably going to meetings, it's often they're not productive if people don't prepare for it. Like for example, Amazon, they use this a memo that you have to write before the meeting, and then half of the meeting is actually reading the memo in silence, and so that everyone is informed the same way and as much as everyone else. And so I think like what we are also trying to, well, obviously we need to figure out, no one has really figured out what it looks like. So what we do is we actually do those calls a few times a week just to stay in touch. But overall, we set up the roadmap. We obviously talk to a lot of our customers, like what they need. We set up some kind of roadmap. We talk about the roadmap, and then basically every month or so we look at is this still the right way, or is these still the right priorities for the projects? Someone owns the project and can write like a brief about it, like okay, this is the project, and then we can like asynchronously like chat about it. And then each week we will just like decide like that week's priorities in one. Basically, we do it in our tool. We do it before the meeting or before the call, and in the call we can just like see if everything is okay, everyone is aligned. Rest of the week we don't have to talk about it. Or like obviously we do, but it's like everyone knows like this is the plan for this like 90 days. This is the plan for the next 30 days. This is the plan for the next 7 days. And so that's one way to kind of, I think what ends up happening in a lot of companies, it's like people are really reactive, and I think that they're changing priorities every day, and I think you shouldn't be chasing priorities every day unless something is really on fire, and then you should fix that. But other than that, like if you change your mind every day, it's like you're not going to make a lot of progress. It's basically like if you're trying to sail somewhere, you shouldn't oversteer. Like you need to like decide this is the path I'm going to go, and then you adjust it every now and then. But if you keep oversteering, you're going to lose speed. So I think like is the tendency that we want to avoid. That can we build the company so that we don't oversteer every day where we're going, but we can have a reasonable time frames for things.
This is what's fun to have a designer talking about how to manage very systems-like approach. I guess to each of you, what are you and your companies doing today that you think will be a trend that will extend kind of beyond tech to other sectors kind of over the next few years? How are you setting the example?
So it's interesting that Kari was talking about sort of dog fooding his own tool. We definitely dog food our own apprenticeships at White Hat. We have a lot of apprentices in our team, and I think it's at different levels. To your point about people going through it at different ages and different points in their career, we're already seeing that. We, over the next few years, expect people to really start embracing this trend of investing in their people, investing in their training and development, putting them on these structured programs. We work with tech companies, for sure, the Googles, the Facebooks, Improbables of the world. They take on apprentices, and I think it's a great way for them to start bringing in new ideas into their businesses and really competent people. But we also are working with companies that you wouldn't expect outside, who are also pioneering. So the BPs, the Publicis media, some of the big music companies like Warner Music and Warner Brothers, the law firms like To The Chance, they're all embracing this trend of, okay, the world is changing, the world has changed. University doesn't provide us with the skills we need for people. We're still having to train them. So let's actually look at this again. How are we going to make our team reflect our customer base? How are we going to find the best and the brightest and the most ambitious people? And they're really changing already the way that they recruit, the way they retain people, and the way they train people. And I think that is the big trend that's going to extend beyond the tech sector. Though it's great to see some of the leading lights of tech really driving that as pioneers.
It's exciting to know it's multi-sector already. See, the future is always, I try to get 10 years out, and these ideas are already happening. Kari, how about you?
Sorry, what was that question?
The question is, what are you doing today that you think will be replicated in other kind of industries? Like, how is Linear implementing something that will be a part of the future?
I mean, yeah, I think like generally, like, I don't know, it's Linear one thing, but I think the software and tech industry is another thing. I think overall, I think one of the things interesting in software industry is that, and especially engineering, is like you're building your own tools all the time. So I think it hasn't really happened that much in a lot of other industries. So I think like legal or I mean, I think they have tools, but I think like they're not like actively thinking about it. Like how could this be better? So I think like that's like an approach that I would want to see more in different industries. Like, should we actually like try to like figure out like, what is kind of like, I think like the best tools also describe some kind of workflow or a system. So like if you have a company goals, like we want to improve this thing, or like generally this is the most important thing for us, can we set up a system that incentivize people to do that, and like, or that it's actually in the tool that like this is the right way to do it. And that way also I think it can help other people coming from the industry, like new, like recent grads or someone like, or these younger people coming to the industry to understand like how things actually work. Because like you don't have to go ask this person like how do we do this kind of things. So I just think that like overall the approach of like understanding and trying to understand like what is your company's system, and then what would be the right tooling to support that or improve that, and like do we even have a system, and then like what if we don't, then what would the system look like? So I think like just generally like having this like meta thinking of like what is our company's operating system kind of, and then like, how can we keep improving it all the time.
Listening to you both, it occurs to me that this is also fundamentally about talent. How do we find the best talent? How do we recruit them? How do we continue to let that talent grow? How do we build organizations to attract this kind of talent? I mean, I think one of the reasons that a lot of these companies are so good at attracting people is that they are innovating on the ways that we actually spend our time and achieve our priorities. And I think, again, from the policy angle, this is an opportunity for countries to think about, can we have innovative policies around work contracts? Should we have apprenticeships in the US? Like, how can we incentivize these remote teams to get up and running around the world instantly? I think that's a real opportunity for governments to think about how to attract kind of the best of the best from all over. So I hope everyone in the audience got a sense of what 2030 is going to look like from some of the people who are building that future. So thank you both very much for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, Sophie, and Karen. I'm definitely feeling less worried about the future of my work. It has become the norm to depict startup success in funding numbers. However, funding is just extra fuel that boosts growth until cash flow from customers is sufficient. Some founders actually live their lives without external funding.
Now, you will have the pleasure to listen to a discussion between founders who have begun their business on a shoestring budget. Sachin Devdugal is the founder of Builder AI, a human-assisted AI platform that enables building and running software without knowing anything about coding. You can actually find Builder AI just next to this stage, where they are offering to build any kind of app with 15,000. With Builder AI, Sachin bootstrapped since its very beginning.
With him on stage, we have Silja Litvin, who's the founder of PsychApps. She is a PhD scholar and a clinical psychologist with multiple released articles already. Now she's venturing into the world of AI and gamification, building evidence-based mobile mental health with the aim of allowing people to help themselves. The conversation is going to be led by Maria Ritola, who's the founder of Iris AI. With Iris AI, she's aiming to help researchers make the best out of literature. And she also sits on the board of Finland's State Development Fund, Vake Oy. They're here to discuss the pros and cons of life without external funding. So let's give a big round of applause for our next guests.
Sachin and Celia sharing the stage with you for the next at least 25 minutes. Today we're going to talk about bootstrapping, but before delving more deeply into that, I just love to discuss a little bit how you define it, kind of in context of what you're doing at Builder AI and at PsychApps.
After you.
Yes, hi, good morning everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for having me. So bootstrapping for me is getting as far as you can with a product or building something without taking external money. So that's really if you just start selling something small or you build it as far as you can because your team has the ability to do so. And up to the point where you have a product that you can get a good price for when you're speaking to venture capitalists or angels or depending on whatever it is you're looking at for first.
And how long did you bootstrap?
We bootstrapped for 2 years. So our story, I'm a clinical psychologist, and when I was working with an NHS trust, I was really seeing that people had been on the waiting list to get psychological care and to see psychologists for half a year and longer, and then they have only 6 sessions. And had we had the possibility to give them something that they could do by themselves earlier, they would have not even had to be on that wait list, right? So as a psychologist, if you work really yourself to the bone, seeing 8 clients a day, you can only like reach 30 people at any given time, right? So the idea was, I'm not scalable, but evidence-based or web-based interventions are. Let's move that to the mobile because everybody has a phone. And we bootstrapped a little team. We did our MVP. We had an evidence-based application that went through a clinical trial. It had the effect size of a beta blocker with no side effects. And so we're like, yay, we're going to go save the world and rhythm from depression and anxiety. Well, the world did not want to be saved that way. So they're like, we're not sticking to this product. And that's when we had to pivot away from the bootstrapping because we did not have the ability to bring the stickiness into the mental health apps. I don't want to bore you too much about mental health applications, but the problem is really retention. People don't stick to it long enough to actually reap the benefits. But people play casual games, right? And so we got our first angel investment after 2 years so that we could onboard game designers to add gamification to the product so that we're now the only evidence-based game for prevention and early intervention for young adults.
Wonderful, and now you're starting your Series A here?
No,
C here in Slash.
Still small.
Yes. What about Sachin?
So when you think about bootstrapping, to me one part of it is sort of what you said, right? It's the period before you get external funding. But I think there's many shades of gray underneath that, and one of them is bootstrapping allows you to create a very set constraint. That in this constraint of whatever capital you have in your pocket, versus whatever you're able to leverage through sort of unconventional financing, whether it's negative working capital or building products that generate cash first. What it allows you to do is create a constraint to prove the business works. Because if you can have a machine working with a set of capital that you deployed, you have much more time to perfect. And a lot of what you want to do as sort of entrepreneurs in this group, if you're thinking about funding, is you have to realize that when you enter the race, i.e. you raise your first round, you are raising every 12 months. Worst case, every 18 months.
What happens if you don't?
You sort of fall out of vintage. And at that point, every month that you don't raise, you become less and less important to an ecosystem that is always accelerating to the next point. And so what you want to do with bootstrapping, and some businesses can't do it because they're building a pharma drug or they're doing advanced R&D. But in many cases, you can always find the minimum viable product, which is not just things that customers want to use, but things that customers want to pay for. And that you should be able to derive a positive unit economics in that bootstrapping period. Because what that does is it tells an investor further down the line that this company is going to grow organically anyway. There's no urgency to invest because of survival. There's an urgency to invest because they're going to miss out. And even when you enter that raising round, so for us, we started Builder close to 5 years ago. We bootstrapped for almost 4 years. We had probably done just under $60 million of total revenue across those 4 years before we raised our seed round. And our seed round was sort of a notional seed round. We did it for friends and family and a couple of folks in the summer before we did the A. And so what you end up doing is you're creating a velocity. So you do a seed in, call it July, you do an A, call it October. Our A was a bit long, so by the time we got the last amount of money was February. And you do a B within a year. What you're doing is you're creating velocity. And velocity is, in companies and startups, is the same as velocity in dating. If you find this girl that you really want to get married to or you want to go on a date with, you don't take 12 months of courting. You create moments of interactions really quickly, and then you create a fear of missing out. And I think that's really critical in anything you're doing where you're trying to attract folks in a really short period of time to buy into vision, buy into business. Otherwise, they'll sit and be very focused on details. And guess what? No young company has all the details.
And did you know when you started Builder, or did you already know at that point that you're not going to raise your first round until 4 years after you got started?
So I don't know if we went in saying it's 4 years. I think we definitely went in saying we're not raising a round until we've proven, A, we can generate cash. You know, and in a world that we live in today with some of the news that's happened about some of the biggest companies, generation of cash is critical. We generate cash. You can always go from generating cash to not generating cash. You know, when you raise venture, when you're raising, you're accelerating. So the view is you're actually burning cash at that point. But the fact that you know, and all investors know that you just have to flip a few switches and you go back to generating cash, that's a real indicator. So we, I think, had the original estimate of maybe 3 years. And then my co-founder and I were very clear that when we raised a round, we wanted to raise it for people that we could have dinner with, that we could go to problems with, and that we could have a really open conversation, and they may be really upset, but they've got our back.
But you've also run, I think, 4 startups before, so I think like the decision whether you want to bootstrap for several years or whether you're going to do that right at the beginning and try to raise a round also depends on whether you have a community, whether you already know the networks, whether they are already there. So when you want to raise a round, you actually know who to go and talk to. So let's kind of also touch on when is a bootstrapping a good idea? Like, are there certain criteria that the entrepreneur should go through, kind of really think through before they make that decision?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to think about. There's multiple lenses to look at this at. One of them is your product. If your product is really deep research and development, maybe you're doing a new drug development, or you're trying to find the cure for cancer, or something of that nature, it is implied, I mean, there is a rare probability that you get 6 scientists together that have a lot of cash, don't need to raise anything, and are going to do it themselves. Or they've been research funded and they're going to pivot out. But the likelihood is you're going to go through an advanced funding route for that. In many other cases, companies fall under 2 broad categories. They're either projects looking for a business model, or they're a business model looking for technology. Business models looking for technology can easily bootstrap. Projects that are looking for a business model are much harder. And usually that middle category is where you would go to an accelerator, you would go to a seed camp, a Techstars, a 500 startups, a YC, because they're going to help you convert into a business model. So they're really important from that perspective.
That's a good point. And Celia, I think you were Techstars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to agree. I think, you know, they say on average you have to do something 10,000 times to be able to become an expert, right? And I guess when you're fundraising or you're bootstrapping, you've done it so many times, especially when you have 4 companies under your belt, that you get also like a sense for it, almost like a feeling.
Yeah, experts is 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Be an expert in anything.
Exactly, and I'm sure you've raised money 10,000 hours by now, right? or you've been like thinking about it, working on it, right? So I haven't yet, and I hope no investors are in here, like moving from mistake to mistake to mistake. Thankfully, each time we come out stronger because we've been lucky and we've had a lot of people around us helping us, like Techstars. But we were in that position ourselves as well, saying, okay, we have this beautiful product, it's evidence-based, we have 5 times the retention than any other mental health app out there, but our business plan or our business model isn't actually viable, so we have to move that into something that does. We know how to do that, but had we had that expertise before, we probably would have started out that way. So it's really a learning process, and sometimes you have to actually experience it to be able to know what you're doing. Sometimes it helps to go into an accelerator, and I'm sure that the 3 months with Techstars have stopped me from making a billion mistakes.
I think the other thing, and that goes back to that notion of what is bootstrapping, that constraint is very important because the risk is when it's your product and you're building it, it's very easy to always be inward focused. That next feature, that iterative improvement on design, that additional thing that you can do because you're consuming it. It's very different to have to put it out into market because you know you've got 1 year, which means you've got 3 shots at it, and you've got so much capital to try it. And so it makes you, it forces you to make really important decisions, crucible decisions early.
Yeah. Are there other criteria that entrepreneurs should think over when they making that decision?
I think it's, if it's your first time, even if you've got a strong business model, it's always good to get folks around the table. And so seed rounds or accelerators are really good for that. I think the second is also, maybe your first one, but you've got tons of experience. You might have been at a consulting company. You might have, worked with another founder. You might have seen it up close and personal. You may have been a manager somewhere. And as long as you have the internal capital for your own standard of living, and you've got the capital to build at least 3 versions of whatever it is you're going to go to market with, and 3 versions doesn't have to be glorious, glamorous versions. They need to be functional. Then I think I would really encourage folks to go down the bootstrapping route. And I think what it does is it sets a sense of urgency. We were discussing backstage about investment timing. And this is going to sound really harsh, but if you don't think you're going to raise a round within the first 3 weeks, you don't think it's happening, or you're not getting all the nodding conversations, you've just about lost 90% probability that you're going to raise a round.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
Do you agree?
Well, it's all about probability. So I'm assuming that there's something right about that. I think we took for the first time 6 months to raise our friends and family round. But I think I was kind of like bumbling around, because I'd never done it before.
It's the urgency. 3 weeks of constrained time. And when you're bootstrapping, you get a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
When you manage cash, you get a sense of urgency. So then you get to 3 weeks. The minute you get to 5 weeks, that probability is dropped another 90%.
So you basically learn the right mentality with bootstrapping, and that's actually something that you can leverage really well once you go and raise a round. But how do you then, once you actually decide to raise a round, a VC round, how do they consider companies that have bootstrap? Is there sort of why haven't you been raising a round? Is there something wrong with you because you haven't raised before?
So I think if you maybe looked at it a few years ago, you would get those questions. I think in today's climate, companies that have a positive unit economics, that can show credible top of the funnel analytics, that can show they generate cash, even if not on an aggregate basis, at least on a revenue basis, there's never going to be a question around that. I think the second is your metrics will announce that straight away. When you're bootstrapping, you're selling. That's the thing, you're always selling, and you're always managing cash. So when you go into a venture round and you know how to sell to a customer, and you know how to manage cash, you're not going to have, you may have 1 or 2 difficult questions. You're going to have a really hard time having continuously difficult questions. Now some people may say to you, oh, you grew at 40% year on year or 50% year on year. And your answer should be, yeah, look how capital efficient I was. And then you want to sort of point to the top of your funnel and say, if I spent this much more and I went from, instead of making 500,000 a month to losing $1 million a month for the first 12 months, here's how this would expand. But you're coming from a world of, I don't need this. I can do it any other way. And I can also borrow. And if we leverage debt before we leverage equity.
Cool. And do you have anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think that in the startup world, you have a certain culture and a certain understanding, and there's a bit of a hype around fundraising. And I think that bootstrapping is often considered as not cool enough, because you say, oh, Sequoia invested into our startup, our seed round was blah, and it was just an idea. And I think, there are going to be exceptions where it actually does make sense, but at the end of the day, having a name VC invest in you might actually just add pressure or, put you on a trajectory that you might not be able to keep up with. Whereas if you had bootstrap just a bit longer, then the leverage would be on your side. So I would urge the startup world to say, take a step away and see how far can I get and how strong can I get before I actually, so that you don't, it's not just about saying, oh, just raise a round, but we raise a round because it makes sense.
And just to add maybe one thing to that, which is when you're raising a round, I always go back to, you need to be able to have dinner and a drink with people. Mm-hmm. You're going to speak to them more than you speak to your family.
Yeah.
And you raise a round with a strong foundation, i.e. a business model that works. Mm-hmm. You will naturally go towards investors that both appreciate that and know how to accelerate it. So we have Lakestar and Jungle and a couple others in our cap table. And Amit and Manu, who are on my board, are some of the best investors I've ever met because they understand when to turn up the heat, when to be patient, and when to say, you should really take 6 months to try this out. But I think that also comes from just a strong institutional understanding that this business made money on a P&L basis, still makes money. And what you're trying to do now is accelerate that journey.
Do you also, do you agree with what Celia just said about like, companies value being too much tied to how much they raise? Like, do we have all of the manuals, startup manuals, basically say that, you know, this is how you build a great company, and that goes through, first you raise your seed round, then you go to Series A, and this is the timeline. Is that wrong? Should we change that, or should we at least build other recipes to build great companies and talk more about it?
So I think this is a trade-off between substance and form. I think form says you need to have a business model that is growing at X, Y, Z, and that strives your value. Substance, however, says it's the fear of missing out and market forces. One of the biggest market forces is how much in demand you are. Now, in the tech community and in startups, a part of demand is how much money is coming towards how much money you want to raise. And I don't think it's a right or a wrong, because you can write form, you cannot dictate substance. Substance is just a market force. You know, one of the things that I often say to folks is, you've heard this ad, right? Red Bull gives you wings. Have you ever had Red Bull?
Yes.
Did you grow wings?
Almost.
Right, and do you have a pair of Nike shoes?
No, I don't.
Okay, but I'm sure you've worn trainers.
Yes.
So if you want to, can you just run 100 meters in like 10 seconds?
Not really.
Right, and so the point is that these are market-defining things that are not related to form. They're related to substance. They're things that you just have to put up with because that's how the market works. And height and timing and velocity are almost as important as business model, cash generation, P&L. All you do with bootstrapping is you don't enter both the roller coasters at the same time. You say, because I can bootstrap, I don't need to deal with this piece right now.
You don't need to deal with hype. You don't need to.
Hype, but you will have to do it at some point. Because great business models and great products will be organic and boutique-y if they don't scale. The only thing that makes things scale is fear of missing out.
So are you saying that you should actually do the substance first? Like get your shit work, get your shit like make money, and then do the other thing.
Get your form right.
So basically the other way around, for example, compared to WeWork.
I mean, many other companies, I think, you know, there are some businesses you cannot enter unless you have critical mass. So, you know, one example is drug development. Real estate and office leasing is a similar problem. Until you have critical mass, like, unless you could walk into 7 cities and have your office there, the model wasn't there. The actual business model wouldn't work. Because guess what, Regis and others have done this for a while. Co-working is not new. But it was the fact that you could walk in anywhere and get access. That's not to say that you should be building businesses that spend multi-billion dollars a year this far into the light, into the extent. And I think that's where you want to balance expansion versus you know, profitability and growth. But that comes down to if you had bootstrapped, or at least had that bootstrapping mentality in the beginning, you would always be striving to, because at the back of your mind, you'd be like, I don't want to see red on my P&L. It's subconscious. I just don't like seeing it. And so anything we can do towards moving things towards black, that's the first thing we'll do. Because it gives you comfort that I can always control this, and it doesn't become a runaway train.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think that the strategies that we're talking about, right, the typical thing that you do the step-by-step, are in a way shortcuts, because, you know, it's very complex, there's so much going on. So they're kind of clusters of habitual strategies or kind of like actions that are put in a box and are easy to understand. So if someone raises this seed round then, raises the A round then, has this and this on their sheet, then it's very easy to oversee, and for an investor who's seeing hundreds of investments all the time, they can do the shortcut and say, okay, I think I know what's going on, right? So if you don't adhere to it, doesn't mean necessarily that you're worse, but you have to explain, because you're out of the box and it takes more computing time to be able to process that. So you'll have a little bit more time, a little bit more explanation, and you'll have to meet people that are actually open and willing to think outside of the box, like in this case.
Exactly. Hey, fear of missing out was mentioned several times in this discussion. Before we run out of time, How do you create that? How do you create fear of missing out?
Multiple term sheets.
Look, I think it's velocity, right? And how do you get a customer to buy? Ultimately, there's need-based purchase. Need-based purchases take months because someone's going to be in the right cycle, they're going to do the evaluation, they're going to go look at 5 vendors. You know, for us, a lot of what we realize, especially at events, is you can move ahead of need-based purchase to fear of missing out-based purchase if you create a tight enough constraint. That could be that, well, if you do this 3 weeks from now, it's going to cost 3 times the amount. Or you have a very concise window, which is why I said 3 weeks. If you're doing a fundraising round in 3 weeks, you will need enough people in 3 weeks. And those people will talk to each other. And if they think the other person's having another meeting, it's the same thing that happens with customers. If you know, we've seen some of the best SaaS companies, and we've invested in some of them privately, and they'll simply say to you, if you want the slot to get an implementation next quarter, it's buy today. And you'd always think, as the customer, but I should go to buy next week. And I'm like, well, you just won't get the slot.
This is your plan as well? Go into that direction with creating that?
Yes, I think that sounds pretty solid. Like just saying like, okay, if I don't hop in now, I'm gonna miss out. Someone said to me there are 2 main emotions that are growing with investment. The first one is greed and the second one is fear. Fear of losing money and fear of losing out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing the stage with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks to the audience as well.
Thank you, Sachin, Celia, and Maria. That was great. So, let's move on, huh? Next up, we will hear stories of 2 founders from the gaming industry. Chris DeWolf is a true visionary when it comes to social media and gaming. He has founded multiple companies like MySpace and Gem City, and has been nominated in the list of 100 most influential people by the Time magazine. Since founding Gem City, Chris has grown the annual revenue with over 500% and raised funding with over 300 million. Gem City is the powerhouse behind many of the most well-known gaming titles, with millions of downloads. And just last week, Gem City released Disney's Frozen Adventures as part of a long collaboration with Disney.
Chris will be joined on stage by David Helgeson, who's the founder of Unity. Unity is a widely successful cross-platform gaming engine. After founding Unity, David served as the CEO of the company for over 10 years. His vision has always been to democratize game development, and now he's working as an angel investor focused on tech within that field.
So next, we will have 2 heavyweight entrepreneurs to discuss what is important when starting, growing, and acquiring companies, and why have they chosen this path. We will also hear some lessons they have learned along the way. So let's welcome our next speakers with a great round of applause.
Boys, cheers. This is not podcast, this is water. Hey, so such a pleasure to meet you finally. You know, I know you mostly as the founder of MySpace and of Gem City, but you've done many things. How did you get started with your entrepreneurial career?
Yeah, it goes back.
Why?
Yeah, so it goes back a long way. I went to traditional undergraduate college, and when I went through my university days, I didn't really feel like I learned that much, and I just really needed some time to think after that. So
What was missing?
Pardon me?
What was missing?
What was missing was inspiration, time to think, inspirational people around me, and so I ended up going to graduate school, and it was around the time that Netscape was going public, Yahoo was going public, everything around us was changing. We all had email, we all had phones, and it just felt like a momentous time in our lives. And I started MySpace very quickly after that. Yeah, but you have something very similar. You have a very past and
Checkered past.
very successful past. But what was interesting to me about reading about you was that you actually got started as a game developer.
Yeah.
And then built some really interesting games because you were passionate about it. But then you made the switch into actually creating a platform for game developers. And it reminded me a lot about Slack, which is the hot thing now. And I'm just wondering if you could tell me a little bit about one day you're building games, the next day you're building a platform for the most important, famous platform for hundreds of thousands of game developers everywhere.
So like, Born 77 means that, there's like sort of a meaningful portion of my generation, I guess ours roughly, that were gamers. Mostly just the boys. Yeah? And we grew up, we were programmers, and at some point we felt we wanted to express ourselves in this medium that we were grown up with. And so we started building technology, which is what programmers do. And then at some point we realized we kind of sucked at making games, but we had built this kind of proto-engine that might work. And then we had this realization that there might be kind of a generation coming like us that wanted to express themselves in games. And we basically decided to make an engine for people like us. And we didn't quite predict that generation was only going to grow and grow and grow. And now at this point is like 2.5 billion gamers.
Yeah.
So I'm really looking forward to, when they grow up in the next few years, coming out and making more games. That's kind of the initial insight.
Yeah, we're big customers. We love Unity. Unity's done a great job. One of the things that I think about a lot is I get calls every day. I'm sure you get calls every day about someone that has a great idea that is going to revolutionize the world. How do you, when you're an investor or you're starting a company yourself, how do you sort of look at someone that says they have an idea or a business plan and determine if that can really become a business? What sort of lens do you look at that through?
I'm a very unsystematic person. I think I just kind of try to take the whole in and then use some kind of intuition on it. But it's something about, I think it's mostly about seeing the love and passion in their eyes for the idea, and sort of experiencing that secondhand, and then letting yourself enjoy. Basically, I start working with people, or I invest by the time I can't resist it anymore. So it's kind of a process of trying to resist, and then sort of letting myself float in, glide into it.
Right.
Like when you started, like for instance, MySpace, like did you have like many ideas, or was it like how did the idea emerge? I tried to ask you backstage, but it didn't even get clear to me how it worked.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I look at businesses through a little bit of a different prism. I try to look at what's going on with trends, sociologically, and technology from a technology perspective. So when we started MySpace, a lot of things were happening. And for those of you that are too young to remember, this was in 2003, and everyone started getting broadband access. Everyone started having a phone that actually had a camera in it. But there wasn't really any interesting
Thanks, Nokia.
Yeah, thanks, Nokia. There was no interesting places for you to upload your photos. It was like OPhoto or whatever Kodak service was, just not a lot of fun. People were communicating through AIM and email, which wasn't fun.
And there was dating platforms, so like there was the photos didn't get out.
Exactly. So we wanted to put all of that together and make it fun to kind of put your life online and be able to share your lives with other people. And all of these things, sociologically and technology, from a technology perspective, were happening at the same time. So we thought if we could put them all together, we'd have something special, and turned out to be the case.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's how we look at MySpace.
In the memory, MySpace has become like a story of almost failure, which is maybe unfair.
Yeah, it was the largest traffic site in the world. There was more page views, more mentor engagement than Google, more than Yahoo, way more than Facebook. Yeah, so we sold the company about a year and a half after we created it. I remained on as the CEO, but again, it's sort of a lesson when you sell your company. There's a lot of things to think about, whether you're a seller or whether you're a buyer. You need to make sure that always that you have objectives that are aligned. And I think one of the issues between MySpace and what's now Fox and was News Corp at the time was that our goals really weren't aligned. Our goals were very user and customer focused and to really grow the audience. Theirs were much more financial oriented. Rupert Murdoch famously said that we were going to do $1 billion in revenue and 250 million in EBITDA, like in our third year of existence.
Wow.
So that sort of changed the whole focus of everything.
Super unhealthy commitment for a company like that.
Yeah, so that was a little bit disappointing, but I just think it was a good learning experience for us because now we're doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and so we need to make sure not to integrate too much and really understand the magic that a founder creates. And yeah, so how do you think about that? You've done
I love
mergers and
acquisitions so much.
Yeah.
Like there's such wonderful moments. I mean, I've never done really pure business acquisitions. I mean, like rolling up revenues and stuff like that, which is interesting. It's just not my field. So for me, like technology team acquisitions, of which I've done a few, it's like time travel. So you come to a moment and you have a board meeting or something, and you're just kicking yourself that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, you didn't start this project. And of course you didn't because you weren't smart enough and you didn't understand the need. And by the way, had you done it, you would probably have done it wrong anyway.
Yeah.
But you have a need and you should have done it. And you find the right team and, align values and all these things. And then you get your signature. In the moment of this signature, you literally travel back through time. You did it.
Yeah.
You made all the mistakes, you fixed them, and you got to this point, and it's a wonderful moment. I love these moments.
Yeah. For us, we look at mergers and acquisitions as just bringing new energy and vitality into the company.
And it's like you can get new founders in almost, like people that have passion.
Yeah, and then you just become this group of, bring this group of superpower entrepreneurs in that reinvigorate the whole company and have you looking at innovation through a completely different lens. And that's one of the things that I think has really helped us to grow. And then when you really look at it.
So John City, how many acquisitions have you done?
We've done probably 7 or 8 acquisitions, and over the last year we've done...
Which means, like, basically you get studios around the world.
Yes, and so over the last year we've done 3 amazing ones in which we've had record revenues over the last quarter. We did one in Germany, in Berlin, amazing studio, one in Toronto, and then one in Burbank, California, that does all of our big Disney type of properties.
And I know Jump City is a game company, but like, what kind of game company? How would you describe it in a few words? Because I guess not anyone.
Yeah, we could talk for
we know your games maybe, but
it's a larger game company, so we have about 750 people in the company. We've created much more of a hub and spoke type of environment where we have a lot of central services in Los Angeles, California, which we're based, a large office in San Francisco as well, but most of those are really central services, and then we have studios around the world that plug into our central services as they're needed. But we like to let our entrepreneurs, to a large degree, run their own show. Because they're the ones that understand their customers, which is the most important thing in the world. One of our most core values is always taking a customer first approach. Before we start any game, we go really, really deep in terms of like who our maniacal customers are going to be. We know everything about them. So it's one of the most important things to us, and any good founder knows that. So bringing that into our organization, having them almost be partners, has been incredibly successful for us.
Do you have anything in Finland?
We'd love to. It's one of the reasons we're here. Jam City North would be amazing.
Wow.
I've never seen a culture of gaming like here. Everyone does it. The openness, I think the collaboration that happens in this city is unlike anything I've ever seen before. And I know you've done a lot of business here.
We did.
When you look at all of the cities that you guys do business in. How do you, like, how is this country different from others? And
well, it's, I mean, okay, like we started in Copenhagen. Culture is rather similar. We have offices in Stockholm and Berlin. This kind of Northern European vibe is amazing. But the Finns are better. Like there's a level of trust here that I don't even see, not even in Copenhagen, almost not in Iceland where I'm from, which is a fucking micronation. You should be able to have a lot of trust, and you do, but it's wild here. So Unity did a very big acquisition back in 2014. The biggest to date. We bought what is now Unity Ads, so our whole ads business comes from Finland. Just the talent, the energy. It's hard to say. Like there's just, the level is really high, and I've been coming a lot back because of that.
So I have a question for you. So we've both started companies, and both of our companies started with a few people and have grown them up to hundreds, if not over 1,000 people. When you think about managing a company with 10 people versus at your height of 500, 600, 700, like how did you have to change as a CEO, and what did you learn from that?
So we started 3 founders in Unity. At this point, the company is almost 3,000, but I took it to 500 as CEO. I was 25 when I started. It was a very kind of personal learning journey for me. Very painful moments. I had moments where I was like such a shitty CEO. I was so confused, just spinning my wheels and running around.
What did you do during that time when you were spinning to get out of that spinning motion? And
really simple things. Like we managed to reconnect the founders. I moved to San Francisco, we raised a round, and it was a very confusing time. We managed to just reconnect, we looked at each other and like, we're going to be founder-led for now. Let's make it work. And that was just like weekly calls, check-ins, like just thoughts in the calendar. Super simple techniques, Google Doc where we took notes together. Really banal stuff actually, but it sort of got our feet, got our grounding back, and could grow from there.
For me in both cases, from MySpace, my MySpace journey as well as Jam City journey, everything changes a lot. So from the beginning, communication is really easy because you're just yelling across the office. The build's going out today, we're going worldwide launch in a few weeks, and if it doesn't do well, it's okay. But then you get to a point where you have 700 or 800 people, and you have to have very purposeful values that everyone understands. You have to have very purposeful ways in which you communicate with your people and train your people to have one-on-ones, and that's really the only way that we can understand where the problems may exist in your organization from my perspective. So the whole role of the CEO just changes.
There's a moment when the company becomes like maybe a few hundred people, where it almost feels like the organization grows across the horizon, and you don't have a line of sight anymore. You start having to trust kind of multiple lines of like people telling you what's going on. At some point, like you'll have parts of the company that are great, and then at some point you realize you're getting super wrong information about something. That's some of the worst moments of my life like that.
So you're still on the board of Unity, and you're, I think, the chairman.
Not the chairman,
but you're obviously very invested in the company. It's become an incredibly important company in the gaming space, at least for us.
Roughly half the games in the world are made with our stuff.
It's saved us in many different ways. So what's next for Unity?
There's two really big things I see. One is that you got like this generation of people growing up with games and gaming, and they think in games, they think in 3D, they think in ways that people didn't do before. So you got like millions of creators that are kind of ready to create stuff with these kind of technologies. Many of them are going to make games, many are not going to make games. That's sort of one side. And the other is that the operating system that is needed for the 21st century ends up looking a lot like a game engine. So Unity just finds kind of usage in so many industries now. And what we're creating with kind of standardized technology across a lot of sectors is kind of a loop of talent that can move between sectors using their programming techniques, design techniques, business model innovation that comes a lot from games.
Right.
And then kind of goes everywhere.
Yes.
And creating that kind of liquidity is something that is blowing my mind, and also kind of the most exciting task for the next many years.
Switching it up a little bit, and I think about this a lot now, because when you're starting up a company in your 20s, it's very different than starting a company in your 40s, or an investment company or an angel. You can stop anytime if you want to. What motivates you on a day-to-day basis? What gets you really excited to get up in the morning and start a company or work with founders, or what is that?
I have an almost pathological passion for people. So it's just, I let myself fall in love with all these people, like all the creators, all the crazy inventors. That's sort of the one side, and then the other is, the future civilization needs a lot of technological innovation. We have to solve crazy amounts of problems. And sort of the mix of the people with the crazy glint and the people that are solving really big fucking problems.
Yeah.
Some of them climate related, others health related. Some just keeping people sane, keeping people connected and entertained. I sometimes say games. I don't know about games, but it's probably like the lowest carbon entertainment we can have. Like it's better than going out. It's better than doing all kinds of crazy stuff with with the world. So I think we're doing a lot of good. But it's just finding the people that are solving problems.
Yeah, for me it's a lot about...
What's the future for you?
Yeah, I don't know. For me it's a lot about camaraderie, and you talked a lot about like all the bad times you can have. It's like, it sounds like very glamorous to start a CEO.
It's awful.
Start a company.
It's glorious.
Yeah,
it's awful.
Exactly. You go through the struggle, and there's lots of struggles, but whenever you go through that and you come out the other side, there's no better feeling in the world. And there's no better feeling in the world than to do that with people that were shoulder to shoulder with you. And for me, there's no inability to sort of match that feeling, and it's very hard to start a company where you have really smart people that are all marching towards the same goal. You're breaking through problems, you're entertaining millions of people, you're walking through an airport and you're seeing someone playing your game, and those moments just can't be duplicated in anything else for me. So that's what keeps me motivated on this.
So what does Jam City become?
Pardon me?
What does Jam City become when it grows up?
It's super interesting because in the gaming space right now, there's a lot of consolidation going on, and so we're one of the consolidators, obviously. We do believe, as I mentioned before, that...
What makes you a good consolidator?
I think it's one of the things I mentioned before, really understanding what's a synergy and what isn't. So, for example, we don't have weekly meetings with every single one of our studios. We don't force them to go through the same sort of development standards and reports that we may in our own studios. So, but they may want to use our UA department. They may want to use one of our 25 data scientists. They may not want to set up a finance department. So we're looking for synergies. We're looking for companies that are...
That's very soft touch.
Yeah, soft touch in adjacent sort of categories that we're in, but that can bring sort of a new energy into our company. And like if you look at it through a historical perspective, what would companies like Google be without, now they have YouTube and they have all these other companies, Facebook, what would they be without Instagram and WhatsApp? Those are all their growth engines. You look at Activision, they bought Blizzard and King, and that's 2/3 of their business probably. You look at a company like Disney, that's bought, Lucas and Pixar and now Fox. I think you have to keep getting bigger, or you have to be willing to just kind of pound away at a really small company. We made the decision really early on that we wanted to become a larger company. Part of that is because of my motivation that I'd like to be able to build things that lots of people can enjoy. And I get excited, for example, in MySpace days when I would see MySpace parodied on Saturday Night Live, or I'd see everyone in the back in the day in the computer lab at the university, I remember we'd be on MySpace where I see someone playing Panda Pop or Harry Potter in the airport. That's what motivates me personally, when I know that my team, our team, has built something that is loved by millions of people. So that's my big motivation.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I built a platform that millions of people use. It's just that's the most amazing thing.
For sure. And so, what's when you come to Slush? What do you do when you're here? What's your biggest takeaway when you come to a conference like this?
Yeah, it's just kind of reconnecting with a lot of people I already know and letting myself be introduced and meeting people that I don't know.
Right.
Finding the best people and seeing who I should be working with.
Yeah,
And you're looking for a studio. That's very concrete.
we're looking for that, but I always come away from conferences like this, especially when there's such a unique culture in the city, that start thinking about making games in a different way and your creative process in a different way. Ask every single person, what does your creative process look like? How do you build games? And here it's very different. People build very, very quick prototypes, and it was months, and now they tell me it's weeks, which I think we all build things in weeks.
We'll be down to
It
days.
seems like it takes us years sometimes.
Sure.
But yeah, it's a very interesting and energy-filling way to spend my time. And I learned a lot from other CEOs that I've met, and people like you as well. And I understand that you do a lot of mentorship. And what kind of mentorship do you do, and what do you personally get out of that mentorship?
Man, you know, this is a sad thing to say, but we're out of time. So, it went so fast. I'm sorry.
Okay. You see the...
I see the timer, you know.
I was looking...
We're literally just out of time. It's fine. I did not answer that question. Thank you so much for the chat. Next time.
Thank you, Chris and David. Sorry you ran out of time. You can go and find the guys sometime later and ask if you have any questions for them. Next, we're going to be talking about policy and about the EU. Our question is going to be, is Europe doing enough to support its startups? And what should the collaboration look like between politicians, decision makers, and policy makers, and startups and entrepreneurs on the other side?
We have brought together representatives from both the private and the public sector to discuss what the role of government should be to ensure that Europe's best ventures are able to grow here on the home turf.
Yes. Next on stage, we have 4 experts who are very experienced in working with a quite pan-European mindset. First, we have Jean Paquet, who's the Director General of the European Commission's DG for Research and Innovation. He is currently administering a 100 billion euro investment into the Horizon Europe project with the objective of increasing research and innovation in Europe.
Jean-Luc Ipalagaloni is the president at Artemis Industry Association and also the group corporate vice president at Ballsaal. Artemis AI represents the embedded actors in Excel undertaking. Jean-Luc is committed to create good relationship between the automotive industry and international bodies, and is also sitting on the board of multiple associations related to this field.
With them, bringing in a slightly more business perspective, we have Rolf Löngens, the Managing Director and CEO of Trivago. Rolf will be bringing in a business perspective because he has led the growth of Trivago in Europe as well as in the US. This means that he has quite a good understanding of versatile business cultures, but also of different political cultures. Prior to Trivago, he has also founded and led Chow.com, which is a consumer review website.
And Maya Palmer from Sifted is coming to lead the conversation. Sifted is a newsletter and community focused on Europe's innovation economy. Maya has also launched Future Proof, the corporate innovation newsletter.
Let's give a big round of applause for our next conversation.
Thank you.
see a big crowd for talking about policy, which you might think is actually dull, but I think we're going to prove how exciting it actually is. I mean, the point I would like to make to start, everyone, is that we're talking about very real things here. We're talking about really real investments. So today, Europe is kind of celebrating because according to the State of the Europe report that Atomica brought out, we have a record amount of VC investment in Europe this year, right? $37 billion, which is when you compare it to what it was just 5 years ago, it was $5 billion. So it's an incredible jump. But there is a big but, because that is about half of what Asia is investing and about a third of what the US is investing, right? So on the one hand, we can be really pleased with what we've done, but on the other hand, I think we have to acknowledge that Europe is not in the same league at the moment. And this is kind of the question that I hope that we can kind of tease apart a little bit. So I'm delighted to have you here, and I wondered if we could start with you, Rolf, because you have the practical experience of trying to create a very big company, having succeeded in creating a very big company in Europe. So Trivago started in 2005. You were the first hotel search engine in Europe or in Germany?
I never thought about that if you're the first.
But anyway, so very early pioneer, and then you've managed to grow it to be a stock market listed company. So you've pretty much done this whole journey that we want more European companies to be able to do. So tell me, how did that go? What were some of the things that were helpful and not helpful in Europe specifically?
I think we have some huge assets in Europe, and I think that our success story is also because of these assets that we have in Europe. So when you looking at Trivago, 80% of our workforce is from countries outside of Germany. So we have a very diverse workforce, and I think that cultural diversity is a major asset for companies. And why are we able to do that? Because we have the European Union, and it's easy for somebody from Italy, from Spain, and so on to work in Germany. So we are able to build up this company, based in Germany, with talent from all over Europe. So we were able to tap into all of these different talent pools across Europe to find the best people. And I think that is a great achievement of the European Union, that we are able to do that. And I think then it's really for us, I think it's way easier to internationalize. So we were quite early in our development, internationalizing into Spain, into UK. So the step for us from Germany into UK, then from UK into US, from US into South America, from South America into Asia, these steps were not so big anymore, because we learned basically in the European ecosystem, we learned how to grow businesses beyond the borders of your home market, of your home turf, in a quite easy way. And I think that's why I think the story of Trivago, the success story of Trivago, is also due to the fact that we have a European Union, that people are able to work across the European Union without any problem in different countries. And for me, for example, I would love, when I talk to the German government, I always tell them, we need a better immigration law for people outside of the European Union. But I'm very thankful for the European Union. For example, there's in Germany something like a blue card, and Germany is not an immigration country, usually. So there is really no chance for immigrants to come into Germany, to work there. And the blue card, which is a European thing, which the European Union put upon the German regulators, basically. This is something that helped us to get a lot of talent from outside of Europe into the European Union. So I'm very thankful for that.
But it's difficult. I mean, I completely hear you. I think that the ability to get talent from everywhere is a big asset. But actually, we're living during a time when there's a big reaction against that. So I think maybe we can talk about that in a minute. But I think this is a difficulty for governments at the moment, because business leaders are talking about let's decrease the restrictions even more
changes. And when there's one trend which is existing in thousands of years, then it's that people get more and more mobile, they move more and more around. Because it's just more successful, right? It's more successful if you create diverse teams, if you go wherever your talents are needed the most, right? So I think this is a trend which will go on, right? And whatever we see right now is reactionary, like to whatever happens, but that can only be something in between because it's just not efficient, and I don't believe that the world will do something inefficient anymore.
But do you want to, can I just ask, I mean, how does the Commission navigate that line between what businesses need in terms of the ability for people to move and then perhaps other forces too?
Yeah, and of course the European Commission is the government of Europe if you want, but we also have a parliament and stakeholders, and they are the member states. So we didn't impose it on Germany, we worked on this blue card with Germany, but yes, the European dimension allowed the German regulator to indeed open up to this additional possibility, and we then were able to put it in place. I think what I just heard is quite remarkable, because essentially it is about saying that the way the European Union is constructed and this free movement of our workers and people, which is the very fabric of what the European Union is the asset for Europe's innovation and development. And I think this is a story which shows that we are in fact very good at innovation, and it's an issue of narrative as well, because you can portray Europe in two ways. You can say it's fragmented between member states, or you can say we have diverse member states, diverse cultures, and this diversity, because you have the European framework in addition, which allows the fluidity across it, makes us a great place to innovate. And you also said, and this is completely confirmed by our own data and analysis, we are attracting talent to Europe. And the old story of Europeans all leaving Europe to do science in the United States and work in Silicon Valley, there are still many of us who do that. It's very positive, because we learn a lot, and I think can contribute a lot there as well. But many of these talented Europeans, they do come back, because innovating and doing science in Europe is a great thing.
No, and I mean, undoubtedly there are some of the most first-class universities doing fundamental research here in Europe, and there are hubs that are sort of being created around them.
Exactly.
But can I just bring up one thing that I think we are missing, which is, I want to talk about money.
Yeah.
Just the sums of money are not here. And this is a question that I'm going to put to all of you in a minute, but just stay with Rolf for a second. But you raised a Series A round, a Series B round for mostly European investors, but then I think you had to go to the States after that for more funding, right? And I know this was some years ago, I think it changed, but
No, I think we have been quite lucky actually, because you call it now Series A, Series B round, and actually Trivago was built with 600,000 euros. Yeah. And we basically after that we financed the whole growth of the company just from cash flow.
okay.
Even today, so it's true we went public at Nasdaq 3 years ago, but we still have that money in our bank account. No, we've grown the company really profitably until today, but we're still right.
Okay.
Yeah, you're still right, because I think money plays a really big role. You know, like because basically, I think like the fluidity of money, like how fast money finds new ventures, it's super important. It's super important, right? And especially when the value is not be seen tomorrow, but if it's somewhere in the future, right? So you need a lot of money basically to drive innovation. That's true. And you need the fluidity of money to drive innovation. And that was definitely something where you struggled for quite a while. And you said, okay, it's quite small still. It's a third of US, half of what's invested in Asia, but also it's growing. Yeah, and I think that is what a startup is all about, right? You are smaller usually than the others, but you're also growing way faster. No? And I think that's a question. For me, actually, it's a question of centralization versus decentralization. So I think that what we've seen in the past was a strong centralization, right? The Silicon Valley being basically this one point where everything comes together. And in Europe, we have is generally culturally decentralized. We have many centers in Europe. Now we have many centers in Europe. And I think for quite some time, when you're in the early stage of, I think centralization is helpful. Why? Because then if all the investors are in one place, they talk to each other quite a lot, and then all the money goes where the center is, right? So that's helpful. But I think centralization in a later stage might rather become a problem. Why? Because resources get scarce. So when you're sitting in Silicon Valley and you're trying to get engineers, resources get more and more scarce, and it's super hard to find people. If you're decentralized, it's way easier than to tap into the different talent pools. And I think that we have seen now for quite a while, like where a centralized setup was superior. I think nowadays, we're going more and more into a situation where decentralized setup is more powerful. Because you have reached, in many of the centers in Europe, you have reached now the critical mass that own little ecosystems evolve. Yeah? Like even a city like Düsseldorf, yeah, which is not a big center, but now you have the size of the ecosystem in Düsseldorf, the way you say, okay, people talk to each other, they exchange, investors come over, and so on and so on. So it's evolving, and I think then the decentralized setup might be even an advantage.
Can I echo that?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to bring John quickly in as well, but if you...
No, just to echo that, I think we have now this distributed ecosystems across Europe, which are becoming extremely relevant. But also what I would add to that is that we have also ecosystems across all 28 member states. And with that, we are creating every year more startups than the United States.
Yeah.
It's much easier to start your operations in this decentralized way than the scaling up remains a challenge. We'll come to
Yeah,
that
well, I
in a
think
second.
scaling up is the problem now, because we actually have more IPOs in Europe than we have in the US, and that's a kind of fact that surprises people quite a lot, but the problems are much smaller. So, but Jean-Luc, I want to bring you in, because do you think you see this from all kinds of, from both the industry side and startup side? I mean, do you think there's something that Europe's corporations could be doing more in terms of trying to get some of this money injected in and working more in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, it's great to be here in Helsinki and at Slush. And yes, a company like mine, which is a global automotive supplier, deeply engaged in tech and electrification, we're going to provide the biggest volume of electric motors worldwide, and also we are in autonomous vehicles. We are extremely friendly towards startup and also towards, I would say, SMEs. And we are doing it at CES in Las Vegas, and Vivatech in Paris, and also here today. And what I want to say is that sometimes when we have to compensate the level of scalability of venture capitalism that we don't have in Europe versus Silicon Valley or elsewhere, there are ways where a large corporation can really embark in their own adventure of innovation, startups. And this can work because the starting point is that in our booths, it's actually like I've seen here at Slush, there you have Airbus booths, you have other large corporation booths. They welcome startups and we mentor them. This is actually, by the way, what we're going to do in a few minutes after this panel. And if the dialogue works, we see what we can encapsulate in terms of innovation. But at the end of the day, one of the possibilities is just to buy them out. So, and this has happened. I mean, in my own company, I'm happy to tell you a story which is amazing. When I joined my group 10 years ago, there was a very small startup in Ireland that was fighting and trying to sell their technology as camera views to BMW. But a 40-people company interacting with a huge concern in Germany, which is the leading premium car worldwide, was impossible. We arrived there as intermediate. We ended up buying them out. Now it's a 1.2 billion euro projection with more than nearly 2,000 people, out of which 45% are R&D engineers. In the middle of nowhere, it's 50 miles north of Galway, a part of Ireland where you have 40% unemployment, and thanks to us, we scaled it up start with thanks to European Union, thanks to, I got greeted by the Prime Minister of Ireland just 1 month ago because of that he wants to come and see it. But this is exactly what kind of larger tech group can do. And also, I'm happy to say in front of Jean-Éric Paquet, what groups and also my association, Artemis, is doing is how to welcome startups in collaborative research. Collaborative research that is funded thanks to systems like Horizon 2020 in Europe, in a different kind of, I won't enter here in details, of different system of funding, but you have very, very selective, very good points where startups and eventually SMEs get from 75 up to 100% funding, where larger groups get a much higher percentage of funding. And there, it's non-equity money for startups. The only burden is how they can cope to do a project that will be international, that will be for 3-4 years, and they need to secure their own brains and their own working force for that time, but then they can get significant amount like hundreds of thousands of euros or millions. And this is also a very good tool how to bring money, how to make startups more aware of their competitors, their ecosystem, how to work exactly what Jean-Éric was saying, in an international environment, because to be funded in a European project, you have to have an Estonian, a Portuguese, a Cypriot, a French, a German. It's not just the classical countries. More and more, you need to really bring the 28 states together.
It's great to get the Irish example. I just feel like that's maybe not common enough now. I still see big companies they're all dabbling with startups, right? And then you ask them, how many pilots they're doing, and you get a big number. You know, they'll be really proud of the fact that they're doing 70, 90, 120 pilots over the last 3 years. You ask them how many of them turn into business that really makes a difference to your kind of bottom line, and then they go quiet. They're not at that point. So what do you think you could say to some of the bigger corporations in Europe to encourage them to be a little braver in how they scale up these collaborations with startups? Because I feel like they sort of die after the pilot most of the time.
First of all, I think I would like to say it's a question also of cultural mindset. You have some parts of the industries that are really understanding that you need to be, listening, seeing, watching, a bit like a permanent radar to what the ecosystem of startups and super innovative small companies are bringing. Some indeed are still a bit resistant to that, and others are indeed engaging more and more. But I think that events like Slush, or their other parallel events in Europe, are being the right wake-up call to shake up some large corporations that were not doing it. But also, we are in a global competition, and when large groups are just being self-sufficient on certain businesses, and they are not seeing that eventually they are risking the end time of their own business, well, that's the way they will go. But for sure, for a company, I belong to a company that is investing 14% of its turnover on R&D. Yesterday night, I was happy to learn that Finland, being best in class as a public country, is aiming to invest 4% of the GDP by 2030. But not all companies are so much driven to innovation, because innovation is nice, but you need to sell the products.
Yeah, I think we should start talking more about those kind of R&D budgets of companies. That would definitely be good. But Jean-Éric, I want to bring in the other elephant in the room. I mean, what is the role of government in this, do you think? I mean, should there be, more scale-up funding? And I think you guys have some things coming up on that this year. So.
The role of government is, of course, very manifold. We discussed free movement of talent and workers. Without a proper regulatory framework, this doesn't happen. Then clearly you also need to set some policy direction, and that's very much what the Europeans are trying to do today. Let me just note the Green Deal and the climate transition we are confronted with. This is not at the heart of the preparation of Slush, but the reality is that the innovators in Europe will provide the solutions for our climate transition. This will not be done only by science or by society. You need to be part of that discussion, so we provide direction. But then yes, increasingly, we also of course have a role in funding and financing. As I mentioned already, the early phase, these ecosystems everywhere in Europe, all member states, industry, you just did it very well, Jean-Luc, but also regions, universities have these systems in place, which is why we create so many startups, and I think this is really important to know it. But what we are confronted with everywhere is e-scaling. So we were discussing financing flows. Yes, the VC market is notoriously less developed in Europe. We are at a third probably of the US one. We are ramping up though.
We're the only one that's growing.
Yeah, exactly, it's growing. But we also need to see that what really makes a difference, and that's also the Trivago experience to an extent, is that you need different forms of funding flows. You're interested not to have just one investor, you want different ones. And the public funding and financing is particularly interesting in two respects. Firstly, it of course de-risks, because it's largely grant financing, not reimbursable. So the equation is completely different. We then move to capital markets or bank financing, which is also widely available in Europe and not often discussed. And secondly, it gives you also a label of quality, because I think don't underestimate that when we fund a project at national or EU level, we are confronted with thousands of demands. And we fund 7-8% of what comes to us.
Yeah.
And we are reviewing this extremely deeply in terms of the tech, in terms of the development schemes, in terms of the basic figures, and we have resources across all sectors of the economy, and we are quite unique from that. No fund has these resources. We have thousands of European experts which we can mobilize and which help us find the best projects. So it de-risks and brings you the label of quality and the stories of those startups progressively scaling up, which have been funded and get the label of EU funding, the European Innovation Council label. They then are very often extremely successful. Let me add one last aspect which is very concrete. We are now moving into the next program. It was said early on, we are preparing Horizon Europe. The headline figure is 100 million euros for the next 7-year cycle, so it's significant funding. And in that, we will allocate at least 10 billion for innovation and for deep tech disruptive innovation. And the idea here is to provide at the same time grant funding, because deep tech is an innovation which is often requiring still research and development, hardware, very difficult, very costly, and highly risky. I mean, not even the most daring American VCs go into that area in many cases. So the case for public funding is very high, but we will at the same time also offer equity, so that the innovator can on the one hand fund the value of death of the research and development, will already be equipped with additional equity, which of course provides also cash flow, so that when they move into the following funding rounds, they have been de-risked, they have equity carried by the European Innovation Fund. Incidentally, this will be the biggest European VC in the next period, 3.5 billion euros when it's set up, and this is just one-to-one financing against the EU budget. The portfolio effect will bring it to the next level, and I think here again, we will de-risk, we will give a new label, we will have equity. I think this will also then allow to really scale.
But I wonder whether, I mean, I think everyone would agree that the Horizon 2020 money has been really helpful, but it tends to be kind of smaller, younger projects and in smaller pots. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, because we're talking about scale-up companies, this talk, and about kind of investing really boldly, or in kind of other instruments as well. I mean, if you think about how Europe has been very bold in some cases in actually backing old industries. If you look at loans given to Airbus, for example, or something like that, then why not take something on that scale and put it into, the startup economy? That would really change the game, right?
I mean, small funding is always relative. We're talking here of funding and equity in the order of 3, 4, 5, 6 million euros. And at that stage of the scaling up, this is a game changer. And the stories which are manifold is that after that funding, 2-3 years later, sometimes faster, you get then into funding rounds of 50, 100, 200 million euros out of markets. But you're also right to say that we will try to connect this initial funding also with other programs, including at EU level, which can provide additional equity, or loans, guaranteed loans from the European Investment Bank and the European Innovation Fund. So there will be from this European Innovation Council funding a platform to move into a bigger round of financing. And the case is interesting. I mean, we're not putting billions in Airbus either, but yes, member states are supporting with loans, the European Investment Bank is supporting with loans, there are also research programs of a broad scale, but here we are talking about industrial development, so the order of magnitude is not quite the same. Now here we're speaking of getting the SMEs into the markets, and then they can.
What do you think, Rolf? Do you think having bigger pots of potentially government money that's co-investing, or would that something like that make a difference?
I think we see that it makes a difference. I'm not 100% sure if the government is always the best allocator of money, but co-investments definitely make sense, and because you just have more money in the system, that's always helpful. Though I don't think you should only restrict it on the money part, right? Because I think it also is about a cultural change. And I think it's also often a lack of confidence of European startups, which is not something which is surprising, right? Because you basically, we grew up with US companies dominating markets and so on, and like a lot of entrepreneurs, like in this first wave of entrepreneurship in Germany, for example, between 2000 2010 more or less, tech entrepreneurship. I think the goal was, okay, we want to be bought, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs started with the idea of like, when do I get bought, and not, making a product really successful to the very end. But I think that changes. So I think in the last years I've seen that changing, and it needs time. Confidence needs time. A build up of confidence needs time, and I think we're getting there. But we still have a way to go, And now we have success cases. We need more success cases. And with these success cases, people will get more confident. And they will not say, my goal is to be bought, but my goal is to create like a long-lasting, sustainable company, and then you will also see larger companies coming up. And I think that we naturally, I'm from Germany, so in Germany, we're generally not very confident. We like to criticize ourselves a lot, and also being an entrepreneur in Germany is not something a lot of people are striving for, because basically in Germany, the worst thing that you can do is fail. If you're not perfect, and built on this idea of perfection, we built an amazing companies, engineering companies, because perfection in engineering is quite important. But it comes also with a downside, and the downside is that we struggle with risk, and we have to learn taking risks. We have to learn that failure is something good. That it's a part of innovation.
What about this idea of whether you should be bought or not? Actually, Jean-Luc, do you think Jean-Luc should stop buying all these startups then? I mean, maybe you should do less of this and let them grow under their own steam. I mean, what's the right balance between having a big corporation that can really help the company versus letting them grow on their own?
First of all, we're not buying all the time startups, but I think what we come at this level of conversation to one point where I think Europe is getting, according to what you were saying, is the principle of sovereignty of what is really important in innovation, what we need to keep for ourselves, but also sovereignty in a positive way. What is European inside, a bit like Intel inside. This is something that we are learning a lot in my sector, which is hugely global, extremely competitive, where some components and subsystems, and particularly when it comes to software and know-how, can be sold even if the end product is going to be in India, in China, in the US, or elsewhere. But this is something really important, which is also helped, but what Europe has helped is with GDPR. It's something that a lot of regions of the world are envying us. Look at what is happening with India. They are rather going towards our system than a Chinese one or a US one. So I think the concept of protecting our innovation is absolutely key. and where this public-private partnership also capitalistically makes sense, exactly what you were saying, which is not much less, scaling up and waiting to be buy out. No, no, no. When something is to be really kept with our flag, let's do it.
And we don't really have enough time to introduce this last subject, but I'm just going to touch on it slightly because we haven't talked about regulation, and this is the absolute kind of on-fire issue at the moment, is whether Europe is doing enough to kind of protect its startups. But so I just wondered whether maybe I can have a quick thought on all of you, and it is going to be quite trivial, but did you feel, Rolf, with Trivago that it would have benefited from having more of a level playing field? Are there things on the regulatory side that you wish had happened?
I'm usually not the first one, asking, for more regulation and less regulation, etc. So for me, the most important thing is that we have a free flow of talent. For me, the most important thing for Germany is having an immigration law. For the European Union to have immigration law. I believe that there's lots of talents out there, and at the end, like it's with companies, it's the same with countries. The countries will be the most successful who are able to get the best talents from all over the world and attract them and be an attractive place for getting the best talents. And I think that is something that I would ask for. If I would have one wish, this would be something.
More free movement. And what about you, Jean-Luc? Do you think that there's a competition, regulation element? What would you put on your wish list?
Well, as you know, versus regulation, I always tend to have a moderate view. That is to say, a good, tailored regulation is the best. Too much regulation kills the regulation, so sometimes this is also what companies are sending as message to public bodies and regulatory bodies, whether they're national or European. But I think that Europe has really done a lot of progress on that field, and we're getting also a competition body that is very efficient at the Commission, which is also protecting us. And I think that we need to keep that kind of pace, that kind of cautiousness, but also that kind of efficiency.
And Jean-Eric, final thoughts? Is Europe getting it right, the regulation balance?
It needs to be revisited on a constant basis. I think we do evidence-based regulation quite well. But yes, I think the innovation principle could make our regulation a bit more nimble. It gives space to experiment, also gives space to adjust regulation as technology and innovation progresses. At the same time, I think regulation has the immense added value of giving a clear signal towards where innovation should go. And without that, innovation is directionless, and that is not helping innovators at all. So regulation, funding instruments, and I like your narrative. And a political, positive narrative about innovation will bring the network of innovation, I think, to Europe, including because Europe is the best in the world on engineering, and the next wave of innovation will bring together the digital engineer and the engineering. It's happening today, and it will happen much more in the next 10 years, and regulation can help here a bit as well.
Well, I'm afraid we are seriously out of time. Keep talking about this though for another 2 hours, but the audience might protest. So thank you so much all for sharing your insights today.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. It was interesting to listen to a conversation where the public and the private meet each other. So thank you for this.
Thank you. Next up, we will witness a comeback. John Lindfors is managing partner at DSC Global. Coming from Espoo, Finland, John has gone a long way, all the way to Hong Kong, investing in companies like Alibaba, Facebook, and Xiaomi. After some successful deals recently, John has actually joined the Midas list this year.
John will be joined on stage by Ilkka Kivimäki, who's a partner at Monkey VC. He's a serial entrepreneur and an investor, and also heavily influential in the Finnish startup scene. Currently, he's also sitting on the board of Aalto University Wave Ventures in Junction.
And 5 years ago, they met here at Slush.
They discussed the emergence of Asia and how China in particular was set to become the world's leading tech giant. At this point, I think it's fair to say that their predictions were quite on point, don't you think? So now they're back to take a revision at the topic and discuss what has changed and what is to come in business and tech in the East. So welcome on stage, John and Ilkka.
Okay, great to be here again. I think that we were 5 years ago on stage and talked a lot about China. 5 years has passed. What are your thoughts today at being at Slush today, 2019?
So obviously a lot of things have changed. We've seen growth in a number of different places. I was just thinking about the fact that the first time when I attended Slush, Alibaba's Singles Day generated 3 billion in total sales. And of course, on the 11th of this month, they generated 38 billion. So 13 times growth in 6 years. I think that the only thing that comes close to this sort of growth is actually Slush, which is fantastic. And a couple of sort of thoughts on the event itself, having been here for a number of years. It's grown in size, but I think that what is more important actually for an investor is that it's actually grown in quality. Quality of companies, quality of investors, quality of dialogues, lots of different networking events alongside the main event itself, which really for an investor is sort of the critical piece. And then finally, what I think is amazing is that I heard from Andreas that roughly 10,000 young Finns have basically been going through this system, helping in one way or another. And I think that that's the most amazing thing, that so many people have been involved over the years in this slush thing.
Yeah, well, indeed. Talking about investing, as you and DST, you have been investing in China and Asia a lot, and looking at the companies like what you've been investing in, JD, Alibaba, Xiaomi, Didi, Meituan, Guashou, even ByteDance. It's just amazing the last 10 years that how come a Finn from Espoo is doing all of this? You're in charge of the Asian operations.
Well, it's it's a long journey, but I think that the sort of for me, for some reason, I was always attracted to the tech sector already in the late 90s, and that's really how I got involved. Back in the first .com boom, when I was in banking, basically helping to find financing for a lot of the first generation unicorns in 1999-2000, very few of which survived in Europe, but I think that a lot of people learned a lot from that. And then 10 years ago, I basically had the opportunity to get together with Yuri and a few other partners to set up DST with a view of really sort of helping companies to grow faster. In many cases, actually postpone an IPO and stay private and focus on growing. And the first company that we invested in was Facebook, which was obviously very lucky, sort of thinking back for sure, which allowed us to basically get into the business. And I think the interesting thing is that if you look back to the previous .com boom, companies went public at really low valuations. eBay, Amazon, Yahoo went public at valuations of less than $1 billion. But I think that what then caused a lot of stress for these companies was that you have a very volatile share price. Employees focus on that share price. Other people that interact with the companies focus on that share price. And our view was that look, there are many benefits from actually companies staying private for a bit longer. So I think that was sort of the idea, to try to help companies find other ways to finance themselves.
So So I guess that you have been putting like what, 5 billion into China or really huge amounts. What have you returned? 5x, 10x?
We have invested over the last 10 years perhaps 4 billion in China. We've had, and we've been very lucky in getting into some great companies where we actually could deploy a lot of money. As you mentioned, Alibaba, JD, Meituan, and many others. Returns in China have been, very strong. I'm not going to give you the exact numbers, but China has actually been returning more in terms of multiples and IRRs than some of the other markets that we've been invested in.
Yeah. What's the criteria? What do you need to have in order to invest, and how do you spot the right companies?
I think that when we try to simplify it, it's basically a question of three things. Addressable market, we want to focus on opportunities that have very significant addressable markets, and within those addressable markets, really, what is sort of really the exact segments, and especially if you want to branch out, how do you really sort of branch out from one particular segment to get a bigger market? Because at the end of the day, that sort of allows a company to become really big. If you have a huge market, then you at least have the potential. Secondly, operating metrics. Unlike very early stage VCs that basically bet on a founder and sort of the personality of a founder, the drive of a founder, we have the benefit of actually looking at a lot of operating metrics. So if you have strong growth, ideally without any subsidies, obviously that's a very good sign that customers like the product, they come back. There are lots of details going into how you analyze it, but fundamentally we want to have sort of strong growth and good operating metrics. And then finally, despite that it's a little bit later stage, founder or founder team plays obviously an absolutely critical role. Every one of the 60 companies that we invested in the last 10 years has been founder-led, and we think that finding a founder or a team that are very passionate about what they do, willing to sacrifice. Unfortunately, there are a lot of sacrifices involved, sacrificing time with friends, time with families, and being single-mindedly focused on what they're trying to achieve, are typically signs that these are the right people to back. So what we really sort of think about is how can we then, in turn, help the founder achieve success? What can we provide him, networking-wise, support-wise, for him or her? And we've actually backed a number of women as well to achieve success.
Is there some like a minimum threshold or revenue, or what's your minimum ticket size of yours?
So we have it's late stage, and actually from the fund we basically invest if the valuation is $500 million or more. But the interesting thing is that, again, 20 years ago you couldn't really do it. Now with companies staying private for a much longer time, you can still come in, provide support, provide capital, and companies stay obviously private for a long time, and you can still make a decent return.
Yeah, well, amazing numbers compared to our fund where we have 80 million euros and doing the early stage tickets.
You're critical for us though.
And at least we are not mixing cases.
No.
Last 10 years have been pretty good for the investments, but how do you see the future, and how do you see kind of the different areas developing, like China, the rest of Asia, Europe, US? What's happening?
It's a very interesting question that we debate within our partnership and with our founders, because over the last 10 years you probably had the longest bull period in recorded history. 10 years. So you actually don't find it when you look at history of the last 100 or 150 years. We're also in an environment where we have negative interest rates, especially in lots of different countries in the world. Perhaps you've had certain cases where you have in the past, but not as widespread. So very low interest rate environment, which means that investors then look for riskier assets and go into riskier assets. So I think that it's sort of been a little bit of a self-fulfilling thing, where obviously investors then in the past few years have made money, so then they're willing to put even more money into riskier assets. At some point there is going to be a downturn. I think that there's no doubt about that. But you never know what the downturn is going to look like. We're trying to sort of make sure that our companies sort of think about it and prepare for it. But the fact of the matter is that if you go back to 1999, 2000, 2001, and then through the financial crisis, what actually happened was that the best companies, best tech companies, actually in many cases took market share. So if you think about eBay, Amazon, Yahoo back in 2001, 2002, they actually ended up taking more market share because the weaker competitors couldn't get funded. Same thing in the financial crisis. If you look at Alibaba, again Amazon, Google, etc., they actually accelerated growth. So for the strongest companies, it can actually be an opportunity.
Yeah, I guess that's the best times for the strong companies. Any kind of differences when you're looking at China today or Europe today? There's been like in the newspapers in Europe that kind of China's venture boom has been fizzling lately, or is that true, or was it just that the first tide has gone?
Well, I would say that there are obviously very significant differences between the two markets. The biggest one is obviously that China is essentially one relatively homogeneous market compared to Europe, which obviously has a lot of differences. And if you have a great idea in Finland, you need to sort of figure out how do I internationalize it from there, how do I do the Nordic countries, how do I do to Europe, etc. Slightly obviously depending on the business model. Whereas in China, you have extreme competition, huge market. The company that gets to the top has basically won thousands of other competitors. So what that has led to in China is that companies raise a lot of capital, use a lot of use subsidies to get new customers or keep customers. So I think that huge fundraisers with a lot of subsidies has actually caused quite a lot of dislocations. And I think that those dislocations are now disappearing from the market. I think growth is moderating, I think that sort of the negotiation power between investors and companies has probably moved sort of a little bit to investors' favor.
Now, continuing on that, can you give us some numbers? Because, starting from the first example, when you said that the Singles Day was 3 billion 6 years ago, and I remember that was a crazy number, and now we're in 38 billion, and I don't know if people think about that as that crazy number anymore. That the Chinese market is just crazily huge. But any metrics?
So there are lots of metrics. China for the last 2 years has actually been the biggest VC market in the world in terms of money raised. And if you look at the market cap of just the public internet companies in China, it's probably close to, at the peak, and it obviously varies all the time, but it's probably close to 1.5 trillion. So obviously a very, very significant market. And remember that the private sector in China is really the locomotive in many ways for the economy. So if you look at GDP growth of 6-7% per year, the state-owned sector doesn't really contribute much to that. So it really comes from the private sector. And within the private sector, it's really the online sector, Alibaba, etc., that drive that growth. So it has just become a very, very critical part of the whole sort of economic growth for China. And I think that it's going to continue. And obviously there's a lot of leapfrogging taking place where companies can basically sort of move to a different position more quickly and sort of bypassing older technologies that might have been used elsewhere.
How about then, well, there is so many of these crazy big companies in China that we have never heard about here. What's your kind of a feeling that we will see more Alibabas that are then coming global and kind of taking the Europe and US?
Well, let me answer that in two ways, because I think that this is actually a very interesting anecdote that I will tell you, and then let's come back to the internationalization. So, if you think about the e-commerce space in China, a few years ago you basically had two companies that essentially had 95% of the market, Alibaba and then JD. And then 3 years ago, actually 2.5 years ago, you had a new player come out that used a slightly different way of gaining customers through WeChat, and they made a few sort of business model tweaks to reduce the customer acquisition cost dramatically. And then with the merchants, this was also a third-party platform like Alibaba. With the merchants, they also developed an interesting auction system for merchants to essentially be part of an auction to be sort of the top merchant for different products. And this company is called Pinduoduo, and they basically went from a 300 million valuation 3 years ago to now being listed and worth 35 billion. So here you have a market which is completely consolidated. You have two extremely strong companies, one which was already at the time worth 300 billion, the other one perhaps 40 billion. And you still have a new company that can come out and disrupt the existing guys. And I think that that's actually something which is really extraordinary. So I would never bet against the ingenuity and passion and drive of some of these founders. You know, today's behemoths will get disrupted. It's just inevitable. And I think that that's obviously what provides us with opportunity. I think secondly, so the market, I would just say that in conclusion, the market is very, very dynamic. Secondly, the market in China has been so huge and the underlying growth has been so attractive that many of them actually haven't focused on really going outside of China. Some of them have done it through acquisition, and obviously Tencent's partial acquisition of Supercell is a good example. But I think that now we're seeing, you know, apps like TikTok, etc., go out organically, and I think that we're going to see more of that. I think another reason why Chinese companies have had to focus on China is that the competition is so intense that you just can't drop the ball. So I think that now with some of these companies having pretty established positions, we're going to be seeing more attempts at going outside of China.
From the European investors' point of view, is there any chance to come to China or Asia in general, or what would be your tips to look into Asia as an investor?
Well, I think that as an early stage investor, a lot of it is relationship driven, so it's actually not that easy to get access to interesting opportunities. And by the way, that space is again extremely competitive. But obviously, you know, there are a number of companies that are already public. So if you think about sort of investing from a broader sense, you can obviously get exposure to many of these fantastic companies, you know, from the point when they're public. But I think that as you know, going into private companies, that's a little bit more difficult, just because of the competition. So I think that there's an opportunity if there's something that you can bring to the table. So you know, when you're fundraising next time, you should think about what are you going to bring to the table. You know, in addition to a great time at Slush, perhaps you know, intro to the European market and access here, something like that. You need to bring something to the table essentially to get access to these opportunities.
How about then on from the entrepreneur perspective and the companies? I guess that you will be mentioning the heavy competition.
And I think that that's the problem. That generally speaking, I would say that our advice to entrepreneurs is that focus on your own home market first. Establish as dominant a position as you can. Then you can think about expanding. And obviously, with Europe having more than 500 million people, depending on the definition, 500, 600, 700 million people, with very high GDP per capita, essentially a 20 trillion euro economy, there should be plenty of opportunities to create very, very big businesses here. And obviously in the tech and internet space, we've seen a number of companies emerge in the last 10 years. But some companies and some entrepreneurs have been successful in China. I think that probably the most obvious case is Uber, that actually established a very, very strong business by investing very heavily and being super aggressive. Now, at the end of the day, they decided to still sell to Didi, but Uber and their investors, I think they have roughly a 20% stake in Didi. So I think that overall, it was actually a great exit for them. So it's possible, but I think that it's actually quite difficult, and I would really focus on sort of making sure that you have a very, very strong position in your core market first.
How about maybe then some other countries than China, Vietnam, Singapore?
That's a great question. So if you think about just 50% of the world live in China, India, and Southeast Asia. India is around 1.3 billion, China is around 1.4 billion, Southeast Asia perhaps 700 million. So half of the world's population is there. So there should be lots of different opportunities. But I think that the difficulty for European companies and US companies is that from a monetization perspective, they need to really figure out if you go for a country with a GDP per capita is instead of $50,000, perhaps $3,000, and in Vietnam, perhaps $2,500. You need to make sure that whatever you charge in Europe or the US, has to work at a fraction of the price. And of course, in many of these markets, the advertising market, I'm thinking about internet models in particular, advertising market is really, really small, so you can't really sort of fund yourself necessarily through ads. So I think that there are absolutely opportunities. These countries are growing between 5, 6, 7, up to 10%. So when that compounds over the years, you're going to see tremendous growth. But if you go to these markets, you really need to think about what the sort of proposition to the customer is.
Maybe then jumping back to in the beginning when you were talking about that, like you are extending the life that the companies are staying private, and well, there's been in the market now a few examples that everything hasn't been going that beautifully there, that Slack and Peloton and a few other companies haven't been performing well. That what's your take on that side? That is there some backlash of that kind of extension of the private period, or what's happening?
It's I think that many of the companies that have had sort of a trouble journey as a public company, in many cases have been loss-making and haven't been generating profits. And then the peculiar thing with the IPO process is that you can actually gather a lot of demand and then not sell a lot of shares. So there's quite a lot of freedom for the company and the bankers to actually set the valuation by generating a lot of demand and selling few shares just through demand and supply. And I think that some companies have perhaps been a little bit too greedy when going to the public market. And then when you get more stocks available to the market after a lockup, sort of the share price stabilizes, really based perhaps more on the fundamental valuation. Problem with very loss-making companies, that what is that fundamental valuation? And if you're in a business which generates a lot of cash flows and doesn't grow, sort of perhaps there's a cash flow floor at 10 times multiple or 15 times multiple, but when the company grows quickly and there are losses, how do you sort of establish that sort of fundamental valuation? And that's why I think that you see a lot of volatility. I think that based on the discussions that we've had with many of our founders, I think that the view among them is that perhaps we just shouldn't look at the market unless we have a very clear path to profitability, or perhaps we should actually be profitable and cash flow generative when we go to the market, and then perhaps you see less volatility.
It's kind of an old-fashioned thing that you should be making profits and money.
Yes, and fundamentally, I think that all of the great companies, obviously, over time they end up doing that. So obviously, if you want to be really, really successful in the long run, you have to be able to generate free cash flow. You have to be able to dividend back to your investors. I think the difference in our way of thinking is that we're happy to support a company being loss-making for a number of years before making profits. But sooner or later, the rubber hits the road, and you have to be able to return something to shareholders.
Yeah. Final question. You've been now, well, at least one day, 24 hours in Finland and in the Nordics, and going around Euros all the time. Is there any secret or hot companies that you would be of interest now in Finland or in the Nordics that are on your radar?
Well, there are a number of them, but of course I'm not going to share that with the audience. We're going to keep those very, very sort of tightly wrapped, and perhaps in a few years' time you'll hear about a few of those. But I think that what strikes me today, walking around here, talking to people, and comparing that to 2013, is sort of a critical part of success of a tech ecosystem, which is great successes. And if you think about some of the successes, broadly in Europe, with Spotify going public and Zalando going public, and other companies selling themselves for very significant valuations, like King and Mojang, etc. And of course, here in Finland, you have obviously Supercell, which is a fantastic case, but also Small Giant Games. I just had a chat with Timo Soinen. I think that that's the fantastic thing, that 2013 there was a lot of stuff sort of doubling, but few companies had really come out of the Nordics, perhaps Skype being the exception. But now you actually have a number of success cases, and what you see is that many of these founders, and I would say all of them really, they then reinvest back into the tech ecosystem, which is really sort of the flywheel that we want to get going.
Well, that's great, and I think that we can continue on that one on 2025 when there is another 6 years that we'll be on this last stage. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys, that was a jolly reunion. Next up